Welcome to It's No Accident, a podcast about the challenges of personal injury and wrongful death law in Florida, one of the nation's most complex legal environments.
You'll hear compelling stories about real cases from our law firm in Tallahassee that will help you better understand your rights and protect yourself from the negligence of others.
I'm Mark Nonni.
And I'm Jaeson Homola.
And this is
It's No Accident.
All right, I know one thing that has been in the news a lot recently are food recalls, right? And I know, in my mind, it's kind of almost two different types of cases, like a food recall case where some type of food there's been a definite recall on it and someone consumes it and gets sick and there's a claim there. And then aside from that, more of like a just like a food poisoning case, right, where someone goes and gets food from a restaurant or a grocery store and gets sick, but it wasn't necessarily a recall on that food, but there's still potentially a case there too, right? And I think you pretty recently resolved one of those types of cases. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a food poisoning case, which is more difficult than a food recall case. And obviously the food recall case is going to be a lot easier because in a food recall case, it's a situation where the manufacturer of the food is admitting liability. They're saying, look, something went wrong here, and we ended up with E. coli in our food, or we ended up with salmonella in our lettuce, or our tomatoes, or whatever it might be. Those are the easier cases, because in that situation, the manufacturer and any defendant that's involved is basically just trying to figure out what the extent of your client's damages are, mm-hmm. and trying to get the case resolved. In a food poisoning type case where it might be a one-off, or if it's usually a one-off case, because a lot of times people will get sick from something and they'll attribute it to the flu, or they'll attribute it to they'll attribute it to the food that they got there. They just won't do anything about it, so mm-hmm. You'll never know anything about it. 10 people could have gotten sick from the lettuce at a certain restaurant or at a grocery store, and 9 of them might not do anything about it, and then the one person that gets really sick and decides to do something about it comes to an attorney, and it puts us in a difficult spot because we can see that there's a situation here where you ingested this food and you got sick, but it's really hard because the manufacturer or the store or the restaurant is then going to turn around and be like, well, we didn't have anybody else complain about it, right. So it must have just been the flu, or it must have just been something else that they ate. Yeah. So you're fighting against this, fighting against the defendant in the case, basically saying, well, look, my client didn't have anything to eat for the 12 hours before they came and got the sandwich from your restaurant that had what we consider to be tainted meat or tainted lettuce on it. And it could be a situation where maybe it wasn't the food that was bad. Maybe it was, unfortunately, you undercooked the meat or undercooked the eggs or whatever it might be, and didn't kill the virus or the salmonella or the E. coli that was in it. Mm-hmm. But from a 30,000 foot view, when you're looking at these cases, you're always going to want the case that has the recall. Mm-hmm. But if you've got somebody that comes in and their damages are bad enough, and they can put together a timeline that shows that they didn't have anything to eat until they came to this restaurant, you can certainly bring a claim for food poisoning. Sure. And we've handled those cases. I've handled them. You've handled them. Yep. They're just a little bit more difficult than the food recall cases.
Absolutely. For the food poisoning ones, really, it's the ideal situation. Not what I mean ideal is in terms of like giving us the best. Putting us in the best position possible to be able to prove the case is, like you said, having a timeline. The person being able to say, here's what I ate beforehand, here's what I ate afterwards. Have a really solid timeline so we can isolate, like, okay, this was the only thing that the person ate. Ideally, it doesn't always happen, but if the person they took a few bites and thought something was up and saved the food. I think I've had several of those before.
I've had a few of those too,
yeah. And then if they do it right and they freeze it, you can send it off and get tested. And then if you find the bacteria in there or the virus in there, obviously that's really good evidence. And then also, kind of like you said too, is going to the hospital and getting having the people at the hospital do their test and diagnosis with the minimum food poisoning in the medical records. But ideally, if they could go beyond that and tell you exactly whether it was E. coli or salmonella or whatever.
Those are very strong cases.
That's really what you need, because I know we've both talked to people over the years who swear they got food poisoned somewhere, but they didn't go to the hospital, they didn't go to the doctor. There's no medical evidence to back it up. You know what I mean? That just makes it hard. Like, all right,
Yeah.
how am I going to prove you had food poisoning without a doctor saying you had food poisoning?
Yeah, no, and I mean, and I'll tell you, it's difficult to get your butt up out of bed and go to the hospital when you're feeling the way that you feel when you have food poisoning, because I've had it before, and it's not pretty, and it doesn't feel good, and you don't want to do much of anything. It's almost like the flu times a million. I mean, you're just feeling worn down, crummy, nauseous, fatigued. You know, you've got it coming out of both ends,
Right,
unfortunately.
literally,
And you don't want to go to the hospital, but the best thing that you can do is go to the hospital, get checked out, and you know, a lot of times they can run the lab work and they can tell you exactly what you've got, whether it be listeria or you know, E. coli or salmonella or what it might be.
For sure.
And then with that coupled with a timeline, we can start to put together an argument as to what might have caused the situation.
For sure. And you know, with the like you said, I mean, the food recall, when it's been a recall, it's a lot easier because basically by the time recalls happen, the company's basically admitting we got this bad product out there, right?
Right.
And so I'd say for those kind of cases, really that, you know, you obviously still want to go to the doctor and get well, you know, and get taken care of, but also trying to either, again, save the packaging or save the food or save whatever it was, whether it was, you know, spinach or carrots. I know I heard recently there's a recall on carrots, trying to save some of it. And if not that, at least maybe trying to go back through, you know, I don't know, a lot of people don't keep receipts these days, but if you still have a receipt to prove you bought it, you know, either that or at the very least going through like credit card or debit card charges to at least be able to say, well, I was purchased, you know, a public, there's a charge from Publix or Winn-Dixie on this date or whatever, you know, just some type of evidence to prove that, you know, you bought and consumed that thing that had been recalled.
Sure.
Basically, right?
Sure. And then the other thing that we see too, as far as food cases are concerned, are the like physical contaminants that are in food.
Right.
We've had situations where someone found a screw in their food and bit down in it and, you know, cracked their tooth and had a ton of dental work that they had to have done on it. On their teeth, we've had situations where there was like, it almost was like a peach pit that was in a piece of food that was not a peach sort of thing.
Right.
That creates issues with like a choking issue or mainly you're dealing with dental issues in that situation, dental teeth issues. And you would think that those cases would be simple enough to go forward with, but what happens in a situation where you've got a physical contaminant is you've got arguments from the defendants about where it came from.
Exactly.
Where along the line of the manufacture of this food did the screw find its way into the popcorn? You know, was it where the popcorn came from, or was it who was bagging the popcorn? Was it, you know, all along the way there's going to be people that have their hands on this food, and they're all pointing the finger at each other as to where it came from.
Right. And usually our client too, saying, well, maybe you actually dropped the screw in the food before,
Exactly.
you know, or something like that.
Exactly.
Right?
When did you open it? You know, did you eat it all in one sitting? How long had it been in your cupboard? You know, how many sittings did it take for you to eat it? You know, who else had access to the food? And you know, you've got all these different issues, and you start, you know, a client comes in there like, this should be open and shut. You know, I cracked my tooth on this thing that I had in this piece of food where it shouldn't have been. And you're like, well, you know, hold on a second. It's not going to be as easy as what you think it is.
Absolutely.
No matter your injury, Nonni Homola is here to help you recover. Visit noho.law today.